In stanza 5 of Ode to the West Wind, this is the final stanza, Shelley makes one more appeal to the west wind to inspire him. And he starts by saying, "Make me thy lyre even as the forest is." So a lyre is a harp, right? Think of it as something like this. And he's saying, please, west wind, breathe through the harp or blow through it and make music as if you're playing it. In this case, the lyre is Shelley himself, right? He wants to be inspired. Similarly, the forest, if you think of a forest of trees, you can imagine that the west wind blows through it, rustles the leaves, and that's a little bit similar to blowing through the harp. So he's saying, make me your instrument in the same way that the forest is your instrument. He says, what if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness. Now the first thing to recognize here is that leaves introduces a pun, so this also refers to pages. And we see that later in the stanza as well, references to verses and leaves and so on. There's definitely a play here on Shelley wanting his pages to be published, to be spread through the world, and to reach people. He also talks about something being sweet though in sadness. And this is the sublime effect that he's been striving for. We also see this in his poem Ode to a Skylark, this mixture of the sweet and the sad. They often go together, and there's great beauty to this. He says, be thou spirit fierce, my spirit, be thou me impetuous one. So full of energy, full of spirit, untamable, as we saw in stanza 4. And he really wants the west wind to be one with him, although there's going to be some separation as well, because obviously a wind cannot actually publish poetry. He goes on, drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And you might remember that in stanza 1, we had the leaves falling, and we see the seeds falling into the earth, and then in the spring they're going to come back up again. So here he's saying something similar about his pages, his works of poetry. He wants them to lead to a new birth. And we really should think here also of a kind of political context. This is an age of revolutions. He wants his poetry to inspire people to start a revolution, to be active politically, and to really make change. Then he says, and by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, like a fireplace, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. This word incantation is very interesting here, because if you go back to the Latin, we have the verb incantare. There we go. And this particular verb refers to chanting, bewitching, casting a spell on something. And you might remember that earlier in stanza 1, Shelley referred to the west wind as an enchanter, driving the dead leaves ahead of itself. And even this verb is coming back now. So there's lots of repetition here. But this idea of incantation, of magically making a change, is really a powerful description of what the west wind might be doing here. Now, the image of fire is interesting here as well. And for that, we should actually probably turn to Shelley's defense of poetry. So let me read a short passage from his defense of poetry, and then we'll connect it back to the image of the lyre here as well. Shelley writes the following in his defense: poetry is not like reasoning, a power to be exerted according to the determination of the will. A man cannot say, I will compose poetry. The greatest poet even cannot say it. For the mind in creation is as a fading coal, which some invisible influence, like an inconstant wind, awakens to transitory brightness. And you can see that that's exactly the image that we have in our poem as well. The sense that the wind comes and it takes this unextinguished hearth where the fire is barely burning, we just have these coals, and it takes the ashes and sparks and then creates new fires elsewhere, right? And the word for this that might be nice to use is incendiary. So causing fires. We often use the word incendiary to talk about politics, like an incendiary speech that incites people to action. Now, the other thing that Shelley mentions in this passage from his defense is that even though we need inspiration, afterwards, every poet pretty much has to work hard. You actually have to put your nose to the grindstone and get the work done. Even geniuses need to do this. And it's impossible in our world for a genius to constantly be inspired at the highest degree. So we need inspiration and we need work, and we see Shelley producing both. Now, I mentioned that we were also going to connect this to the image of the lyre earlier in the poem. And here we can look to another passage from A Defense of Poetry. Shelley writes at one point, "Man is an instrument over which a series of external and internal impressions are driven, like the alternations of an ever-changing wind over an Aeolian lyre." And Aeolus was the god of the winds, "which move it by their motion to ever-changing melody. But there is a principle within the human being, and perhaps within all sentient beings, which acts otherwise than in the lyre, and produces not melody alone, but harmony, by an internal adjustment of the sounds or motions thus excited to the impressions which excite them. It is as if the lyre could accommodate its chords to the motions of that which strikes them." In other words, it's not just about the wind playing the lyre and creating melody. In order to have a fuller harmony, we ourselves need to be attuned and respond. So it's really an interaction between nature and the human person. Both sides contribute something. And we see that then throughout this last section as well. It's Shelley reaching out and saying, make me your lyre, scatter my ideas, but he himself, of course, is doing the speaking. He himself is doing the writing. So he finishes his poem then with the lines, "Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind?" And this last line is very optimistic. Well, it's in the question format, but we expect the answer to be yes, no. Spring is not going to be far behind. It's going to be spring in no time, and then all of this new birth is going to be quickened. In terms of the larger context here, we can also remember then that at the end of A Defense of Poetry, Shelley writes that the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. So he really feels that this language of trumpets and prophecies is not just hyperbole. He believes that poets can make a change in society and really have an effect on people. And they do that, first of all, by inspiring them, by making them more emotional, more imaginative, and through these things, then we also get real political action. One last detail to consider here. So earlier in the poem, we looked at a number of different elements. We saw earth, air, and water. And now the poet finishes by looking at fire, right? So fire is the final element, although you could argue that the wind is a kind of fifth element. And so this creates closure at the end where we come full circle and we have this sense that this is not just a poem about the wind in some abstract emotional form, but we have a poem that really tries to be practical as well, as Shelley wants to be inspired to make actual change.